was really good. Unlike some, I do not think you are crooks. In fact, you're all American companies, and I'm proud of you. And I thank you for supporting the most sophisticated and powerful economy in all of human history, and the jobs you create for Americans in doing it.
Republican Senator John Kennedy hijacked the Senate Banking Committee hearing with bankers to profess his undying love for the banks. In fact, in the beginning of that video, you might have noticed he was literally wiping the saliva off his face. He was salivating at the notion of just being in the same building as these precious, precious bankers. Now, the reason for this hearing was so that big bank CEOs can voice their objections to the Biden administration considering regulations that would, maybe hold them a little more accountable with what they do with deposit accounts and how they treat their clients and customers. But it's precisely the legal bribes that these bankers funnel to politicians like Senator Kennedy that will likely block the very regulations that we're talking about here. But I think it's important to talk about the various interactions that happened during this hearing. That's the reason why I wanted to do this story to begin with. So let's first take a look at why Kennedy seems to have this devotion, this undying love for these banks. Well, it could have something to do with the fact that he has taken a total of $467,239 in campaign donations from the commercial banking industry. It could be that, it could be. That includes JP Morgan Chase, of course, Bank of America, Citigroup. And the CEOs of all three of those banks were present at yesterday's Senate Banking Committee hearing. But wait, there's even more. Let's take a look at who else funds Kennedy, who else makes Kennedy salivate during hearings. Well, if you take a look at this graphic, it'll show you the securities industry, the securities and investments industry, which has funneled nearly $2 million to Senator Kennedy and his campaigning. I would venture to say that that has a huge impact on how someone might feel about these banks. And by the way, that also includes the likes of Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, and their CEOs were present during the hearing yesterday as well. So why were the CEOs at the hearing anyway? Let me give you more details about what they're objecting to. So the heads of Wall Street's biggest banks used an appearance on Capitol Hill on Wednesday to plead with senators to stop the Biden administration's proposed changes to how banks are regulated. The banks are adamantly against a number of proposed regulations that could hit their profitability, including new rules from the Federal Reserve that would require big banks to hold additional capital on their balance sheets. So the reason why the Federal Reserve wants that is, to prevent what we experienced earlier this year with various regional banks not having enough cash on hand to pay their depositors as they withdrew money from their accounts. And what did the United States government do in response to that? Well, they came in and they bailed out those banks to ensure that those depositors got their money back even as those banks collapsed. They want to prevent that scenario from happening again, so they're considering increasing the amount of liquidity that these banks have. So Cenk, we've got more video to get to, but I'm curious about that salivating moment with Kennedy. What are your thoughts on that?
There's two issues here. One is the substance of the law, and the other is how their politicians are reacting. So what Basel's doing is so important because that's the number one way to make sure they're not taking too much risk. Because if you bet $1 and you have $1, there's no problem at all. Bet all the dollars you have, that's okay. That's free market capitalism, no problem. But if you're betting you're betting $10 and you only have $1 to back it up, which is actually relatively normal. Ooh, that's a lot more risky because if the price goes down from 10 to 7, you don't even have the $3 that it went down. You only bet, you put up $1 and you leveraged it, right? But in 2007-8, what wound up happening is leverage of like 100 to 1. And they would gamble on top of the gambles. It was nonstop derivative trading, which is just basically gambling, 100% gambling, but with crazy leverage. And any gambler knows that if you have that kind of leverage, you're toast because any downturn and you just don't have the money and it collapses and it creates dominoes. So now the bankers are, because they're human beings, are infinitely greedy. We all, that's unfortunately the nature of man. So they know that if I can leverage $1 to 10, then I'm gonna make a lot more money, right? If I can leverage it to 20 or 100, I'm gonna make so much more money. But I'm taking a risk, but it's not my money. It's the depositors' money that I'm gambling with. So if I lose their money, who cares? I already got the bonus the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that. So they are incentivized to take maximum risk with your money. That's where the government has to come in and go, whoa, 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 there's rules here. You can't bet that much and you can't leverage that much. And that's what they're doing in Europe, and they've actually done a pretty good job in Europe.
Right.
And so since it's a global market for finance, that also affects us here. So, and the reason that things haven't completely blown up since 2008 is because they did get pretty strict in Europe, and it did affect America, and we did get back to a little bit of sanity. Now they're saying, no, let's go back to insanity. Okay, so now that's where these corrupt senators come into play. And they go, you are wonderful American companies. Wait a minute, they're all multinational corporations. The stock can be bought by anyone from any country. What do you mean they're American companies? That's a nonsensical statement to begin with, right? And their executives and their board members and their shareholders are from all over the world. There is no such thing as an American company that's public.
That's a really good point. I love that you mentioned that. And also remember what the Biden administration is attempting to do is prevent another catastrophic scenario in which we, the American people, the taxpayers, bail out these banks as they engage in risky maneuvers with their depositors' money. The other thing Biden wants to do, by the way, and I give him credit for this, if it actually goes through and he fights for it, is rein in overdraft fees. As the Associated Press reports, there are also proposals coming from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I would argue the best government agency we have at the moment, that would rein in overdraft fees, which have also been a longtime source of revenue for consumer banks.
So that's the overdraft fees, the way that they execute them is pretty much just robbery. And I remember interviewing someone after 2008, Crash, that wrote a book, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own a Bank. And so that's how they rob their own depositors. But the damage from that is devastating for the average man, but is not a systemic risk to the entire global economy. It's just petty theft, right? It is, don't get me wrong, it's terrible, and I love that Biden is trying to do something about it. But the systemic risk is in the leverage. And that dooms the whole world economy, everybody loses their jobs, etc., if they take those risks. But now here comes the senators to rescue the people that bribed them. Again, that's why I always go back to mainstream media being the heart of the problem, because if they said the truth, like, hey, he didn't take $1.5 million from bankers just because they happen to agree that the general welfare is served by him deregulating the banks, and golly gee, it's a total coincidence that he got a $1.5 million. No, those are legalized bribes, and every person knows it, but the problem is most people aren't aware of it because the media doesn't report it and call it legalized bribes.
Now, typically in these types of hearings, you'll have various members of Congress, all of whom have been corrupted by these legalized bribes, engaging in this theater of good cop, bad cop. And so you just witnessed Kennedy play the role of good cop. I love the banks, I'm wiping the saliva off my face as I salivate just thinking about the bankers, right? But then you have Republican Senator J.D. Vance come in and attempt to play the role of bad cop. So without further ado, let's watch.
This is a graphic compiled by my staff, which lists the ways in which your financial institutions have gotten involved in major political debates of the last few years. Things like the Georgia voter identification law, things like whether to lend to fossil fuel-based companies, things like guns and abortion. I should say, of course, that we all have our opinions on matters of public policy. Senator Cortez Masto and I disagree. But the difference between Senator Cortez Masto and I and all of you is that the people of our states elected us to do public policy. Nobody elected you, and so my counsel and my line of questioning is going to be very focused on this particular issue. Stay out of public policy unless it affects your core business interests, because if you don't, it's going to be a lot harder for us to see you guys as neutral arbiters and neutral actors in the American financial system. It's going to be much easier for us to see you as political actors.
Neutral actors, they're bankers. They're looking out for their bottom line. That is, there's no neutral with that. And also there's no neutral from a guy who is collecting, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars, in other cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars from the very industry that he purports to wanna be tough on. So let's actually get to those numbers, and then I'll mention what he decided to emphasize in that video, because it wasn't the need for regulations for these banks to ensure that they're not engaging in risky trading and maneuvering with depositor money. Notice he only focused on what the Republican Party typically says is the woke component of corporations, right? The efforts to fund renewable energy, stuff like that. He's got an issue with that. But there's no conversation from JD Vance or any other Republican member of the Senate or the House of Representatives about implementing policies, regulations to protect us, the American people, from some of the more predatory behavior that these banks could be engaging in and oftentimes do engage in, and certainly did engage in the lead up of the 2008 economic collapse. And you look at JD Vance's campaign donations, where he's getting the bulk of those donations from. When it comes to the commercial banking industry, I mean, he's a brand new senator. He collected $83,692. There you have it. This is from opensecrets.org. And then when it comes to securities and investment, from that industry, he has collected $742,682. So are we really gonna sit here and pretend like he's a tough guy when it comes to banks? Come on.
And by the way, that massively underestimates it because of the super PACs and the dark money PACs. Whenever you see numbers like that, multiply it by 2, 5, 10. We don't know because it's dark money PACs, and the super PACs are not traced in the same way to specific candidates. So it's a much, much larger number. These bribes are gigantic.
Which is why a little later in the same hearing, JD Vance engaged in this.
If you guys are going to use the financial power that you've accumulated to go to war against the values of our voters, impoverish our constituents who rely on cheap energy, and destroy the jobs of people who work in the energy sector, why should we listen to you when you come and ask us for a tax break or for reasonable regulations?
No, that was amazing. Do you want to break that down, Cenk?
Yeah, so these guys get bribed, and then mainstream media says, no, there are no bribes. Those millions of dollars are just because they happen to want the general welfare, and they happen to think, and look at that, JD Vance and Senator Kennedy both think the general welfare is to deregulate the banks, as he just said.
That's what he just said.
Right, and lower their taxes.
Like,
right?
How dare you guys invest in renewable energy or anything to combat climate change? If you continue engaging in something that goes against my values, because he says Americans' values, but he's really referring to himself, right?
And there is no value. He's just trying to protect another set of donors, which are the fossil fuel companies.
Yes.
So he's trying to maximize his bribes. But since mainstream media will not say under penalty of law that these are legalized bribes and that these guys are all crooks, the frustration builds in the country. And now this is the really interesting part. So average American, right wing or left wing, looks at it and goes, man, these guys are crooks. I can see the millions of dollars they're taking. So I don't care how much you tell me they're honorable gentlemen having debates and stuff. No, they're crooks, right? Then this is genius. The Republicans like JD Vance come in and go, I'm a pop. You're right. These guys are all crooks, and you know what? I'm going to hold those bankers accountable. They're the ones that needed the bailout in the first place, and they're the ones that broke the economy in the first place. That's why I don't want them being politically correct and helping gay people. Instead, I'm going to give them more tax breaks and allow them to take even more risks with the economy. Wait, what? Your remedy has nothing to do with, in fact, it's the exact opposite of the problem. No, if you want, you should be regulating the banks to make sure that they don't hurt the average American. Instead, you don't mind that part at all, the part that caused the problem. You distract people with, oh, they like gay people or black people or whatever it is too much. Oh my God, they're investing in solar energy. So what? It's a free market. Why can't they invest in whatever the hell they want? Now the government is going to tell private industry what to invest in? Otherwise, they get called woke?
Well, if their other donors don't like what the banks are investing in, then yeah, that is what they do.
So you see how they jujitsu the corruption to make it look like they're the populace fighting back against the corruption, when in fact they're insisting on even more corruption. They're like, hey, if you help our oil company guys who are bribing me, I'll let you cheat on your taxes and deregulate you. So, and then he says, look, I don't want you affecting public policy. But wait a minute, deregulation is public policy. Tax rates are public policy. So you don't mind them affecting that public policy, which you guys are all in cahoots on. You only mind it if it affects other public policy that affects your other donors and your other interests. So the whole thing is a joke. These guys are all criminals that are taking legalized bribes and then are just basically the servants, the dogs of corporations who actually own them and control them. So it's a puppet show that you're seeing right there.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.